we want you to know.
Aaron Hernandez's journey from celebrated National Football League star to convicted murderer remains one of the most shocking, tragic, and widely discussed crime stories in modern American sports. History, a tale that intertwines athletic greatness, personal turmoil, violent behavior, and legal consequences in a way that continues to fascinate and disturb audiences years after the events first unfolded. Hernandez, once known as one of the most gifted young tight ends in the NFL, rose to fame quickly after joining the New England Patriots, where his combination of speed, strength, versatility, and game-changing athleticism made him one of the league's most promising talents, a player believed to be on track for a long and successful career. Yet beneath the surface of his public success, investigators later revealed a pattern of volatile behavior, paranoia, poor decision-making, and deeply troubled relationships, all of which gradually came together in a devastating chain of events that culminated in the murder of Odin Lloyd, a 27-year-old semi-professional football player who had been dating the sister of Hernandez's fiancée, Cheyenne Jenkins. The connection between Lloyd and Hernandez added a complex emotional layer to the case because the two men were not strangers nor random acquaintances, but individuals linked through family relationships and frequent social interactions, making the resulting crime feel not only violent and senseless but also deeply personal. Lloyd's body was discovered in June 2013 in a remote industrial area near Hernandez's home in North Attleboro, Massachusetts, and the circumstances of the discovery were chilling. Lloyd had been shot 6 times and left in a gravel pit, his body abandoned in a way that suggested a deliberate attempt to silence him and distance the crime from residential neighborhoods. Almost immediately, suspicion fell on Hernandez due to surveillance footage, phone records, and witness statements that placed him with Lloyd in the hours leading up to the murder. And soon the investigation expanded rapidly, revealing a web of evidence, videos showing Hernandez at his home holding what prosecutors said appeared to be a gun, text messages between Hernandez and Lloyd setting up their meeting, and footage showing Hernandez leaving his house shortly before the time prosecutors believed the murder occurred. Prosecutors argued that the motive behind the killing stemmed from Hernandez's anger over Lloyd interacting with people Hernandez disliked at a Boston nightclub days earlier, an action Hernandez allegedly interpreted as disloyal or disrespectful. This accusation, combined with testimony about Hernandez's increasingly erratic behavior, allowed prosecutors to craft a narrative of a man who was consumed by paranoia, driven by impulses, and willing to use violence as a means of maintaining control and asserting dominance within his social circle. Over the course of more than 2 months, the prosecution presented a case that, while circumstantial, was dense, detailed, and highly persuasive. More than 100 witnesses were called to testify, including friends, associates, law enforcement officers, forensic experts, and individuals familiar with Hernandez's behavior and the days surrounding the murder. The prosecution emphasized that although no direct eyewitness saw the shooting and no murder weapon was ever recovered, the strength of the circumstantial evidence formed a tight and compelling chain that pointed to one conclusion: Aaron Hernandez orchestrated and participated in Lloyd's killing. They highlighted details such as Hernandez disabling his home security system shortly after returning from the shooting, his attempts to minimize or control communication, and the involvement of two associates, Cernus Wallace and Carlos Ortiz, who prosecutors said helped Hernandez carry out the crime and who were themselves later charged separately. All these elements, the prosecution argued, demonstrated premeditation, intention, and an effort to cover up the evidence, painting Hernandez not as a bystander, but as the mastermind behind a violent execution. The defense, however, presented a strikingly brief case, lasting only a single day and calling just 3 witnesses. Hernandez's attorney, James Sultan, made the strategic decision to acknowledge that Hernandez was indeed present at the scene of the crime, but attempted to redirect blame toward Wallace and Ortiz, claiming that the two men allegedly under the influence of PCP acted unpredictably and violently carrying out the murder while Hernandez stood by shocked and uninvolved. Sultan argued that Hernandez's presence did not equate to guilt, emphasizing the lack of a recovered weapon, the absence of eyewitness testimony, and the possibility that Hernandez, despite being physically present, may not have been the shooter. Yet the jury ultimately rejected this theory, finding the prosecution's narrative far more credible, consistent, and supported by the interlocking details of the evidence. After days of deliberation, the jury convicted Hernandez of first-degree murder, a charge that in Massachusetts carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict represented the complete collapse of Hernandez's career, personal life, and public image, transforming him from a celebrated athlete into a convicted murderer whose actions devastated families and shocked the nation. For the Lloyd family, the trial was a painful and emotional ordeal, forcing them to relive the violent loss of a loved one in the public spotlight, while enduring intense media coverage and the heavy emotional toll of hearing graphic details about Lloyd's final moments. For Hernandez's family, the verdict was equally devastating in a different way, forcing them to confront the reality that someone they loved and supported had committed an irreversible and horrific act that would define his legacy forever. Beyond the courtroom, the case triggered widespread discussions about the pressures faced by professional athletes, the long-term psychological effects of head injuries, the role of environment and upbringing in shaping behavior, and the complex relationship between fame and personal responsibility. Analysts revisited Hernandez's troubled past, noting his exposure to violence during childhood, alleged gang connections, substance abuse issues, and emotional volatility, raising questions about whether warning signs had been overlooked as he ascended the athletic ranks. Some observers argued that the NFL and college programs should have acted sooner to address Hernandez's behavioral problems, while others emphasized that ultimately Hernandez made conscious choices that led to Lloyd's death, choices that cannot be excused by external influences. The legal community also examined the case as an example of how circumstantial evidence, when meticulously assembled, can be just as powerful as direct evidence, and how modern investigative techniques, cell tower data, digital surveillance, text message reconstruction can form the backbone of a compelling prosecution even without a weapon or eyewitness. In the years that followed the conviction, the story of Aaron Hernandez continued to evolve through appeals, media investigations, documentaries, and public debates, each exploring different aspects of his personality, his life, and the deeper questions raised by his downfall. Yet at its core, the case remains fundamentally about the tragic and senseless loss of Odin Lloyd, a man whose life was cut short by violence, and whose family continues to bear the weight of his absence. The story of Aaron Hernandez stands today as a haunting reminder of how quickly a life filled with promise can disintegrate into darkness, how fame cannot shield a person from the consequences of their actions, and how choices fueled by anger, mistrust, and violence can destroy not only the lives of others but also one's own future. It remains one of the most dramatic and sobering crime stories in sports history, serving as a powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked impulses, the destructive power of toxic personal relationships, and the devastating ripple effects of a single irreversible act.